My name is Andrew Hoddle. I'm a professor of art history here at Rowan University. And I want to thank, first of all, Mary Salvante, our gallery director, and Kristen Qualls, the gallery coordinator. I'll get your title correct this time. Both of whom have helped to make this possible in a very real way. So I thank them. And also our installer, who I don't think is here tonight, Tyler Klein, who beautifully hung this work. So it's important for us to acknowledge these contributors to this show. I also want to, of course, thank Chris and Carolyn Goldsmith, who are here with us today, and Lori Wilk, Jo Ann's best friend and executor. So we're very happy to have all of you here, all three of you here, and your friends, of course. This couldn't have happened without you because, of course, Chris and Jo Ann donated works by their mother to the university, and Lori has been an important contributor as the executor of Jo Ann's estate, which is what has made this exhibition possible financially. So thank you very much for these people. We really appreciate you there. So MaterFilia is an exhibition of Elsa M. Goldsmith and Jo Ann Goldsmith. The signage tells you things about it, but I'll give you a little summary. The title really comes from the Latin words mater for mother and filia for daughter. And I chose these words because the terms mater and filia look very different. They don't have an evident relationship. But when you understand them semantically, there is actually a clear connection. Jo Ann's work and Elsa's work don't really look much alike. And in conceiving an exhibition of a mother and daughter, I thought it was important to really look for the potential relationship underneath the art. As it turns out, Elsa Goldsmith, who was the older, obviously, of the two, began as an advertising design artist when she was young, and Jo Ann took that path in her career as an advertising design professional. So there was this very early kind of connection between them as young women, although of course they were doing this decades apart. Elsa was not raised in an artistic household specifically. Jo Ann had the advantage of growing up around all of her mother's work, so she was, I think, much more aware that art was a real career than her mother was. But Elsa persevered nonetheless and created a really remarkable body of work. This exhibition is specifically for Women's History Month. We scheduled it to coincide with Women's History Month to celebrate women's achievements. So a mother-daughter exhibition made a certain amount of sense. And I have to credit Lori, actually, with, with saying up front, could you do a mother-daughter exhibition? And I thought, oh, that's an interesting idea. Yes, let's do that. I had no idea how this was going to come together. I just thought, yes, let's do that. It's a good idea. So here we are. Elsa, as it turned out, was doing these figurines early on. She was doing book illustrations. She was, for a time, she worked at Newsweek magazine in advertising layout. So I immediately saw a relationship between the two in that respect, but then I wasn't quite sure how all of this fine art that Elsa was producing would fit into this larger context. In a way, it doesn't quite, but I think that's part of what makes it interesting. If you look at Jo Ann's work, some of her advertising work is here in the sort of this corner part. Some of her illustration work is behind me. You will probably not see a lot of stylistic similarities between them. There are illustrations, which of course are linear in character, so you will see a relationship there. But the style generally is different. They were working quite a number of years apart in their illustration designs. But again, that underlying idea of creating illustrations certainly ties them together across their generation. Elsa moved on to become a fine artist. That became her real interest, and that's why there is a large section devoted to that part of her career, because that was her true interest. Jo Ann, as I said earlier, took the direction of really focusing on advertising design, worked in a number of Madison Avenue advertising agencies, and then went on to work as a freelancer, really for the rest of her life. The advertising part of it was really central to Jo Ann's work, and in her later life, the part after working for all of those large advertising companies, she really focused on the idea of what she called branding with heart, which was really about branding that was about the person and about the goals of that individual or that company. So instead of sort of creating these facades, it was really about getting deeper into branding that was actually meaningful in some way. We don't have much of that to show in here, but I do think there are some hints of that even in the children's book she illustrated, kind of that connection with the individual, so you get that sense in that work. As I mentioned, this is for Women's History Month, and if you read some of the text, you'll discover that Elsa and Jo Ann actually had quite a bit of interaction with women. Elsa Goldsmith's original design work for Belle Kogan, who was one of the handful of female industrial designers in the 1940s. Some of that is shown here. Elsa Goldsmith also studied with an artist named Betty Holiday, who was a prominent Long Island painter, also a woman. She studied etching and printmaking generally with Ruth Leaf, who was also an influential female printmaker. So actually, this show is not just about Elsa and Jo Ann. It's really about women's contributions to art in a much larger sense. That is also true of the Sister Chapel installation, which is a celebration of women's achievements. So the whole room is really filled with, I think, the kind of female energy that we're really interested in recognizing, especially for Women's History Month, but really through our permanent collection, which is a collection that consists entirely of works by women. So all of this fits very well in the Rowan University Gallery, Art Gallery's plan for recognizing women's achievements. I won't talk about everything, but I do just want to point out again the advertising by Jo Ann Goldsmith. There's a Masson Gildouche ad, which might seem strange, but if you read the information, you'll know something about it. But it was the recipient of a Clio award, Clio Finalist Award, which is a prominent advertising design award, and it was for educational advertising, right in that moment when the women's movement was really advocating for women's bodily autonomy and greater access to contraception. So this ad might seem a little strange or out of place, but actually it accords very nicely with the idea about women's roles in society. And of course, the evolution of the women's movement and the improvement of women's circumstances as a result of that. And of course, the Sister Chapel is a major statement on that. There's also some overtly sexist advertising that you will see that was very much from the 1980s. So I'll let you look at that and think about pantyhose and dishwashing liquid, which really do have some very interesting sort of commentary, so I encourage you to read those. As you come around the corner, you'll see the design work, and so we have Elsa's designs for figurines. You'll see Jo Ann's greeting card designs and also an angel that she drew. Designs that Jo Ann created for book illustration, and a finished version of that work is in the display case, which you see here, and then a couple of Elsa's humorous illustrations, which depend on the idea of surprise, which is a kind of interesting idea. One of the things you'll probably notice is that both Elsa and Jo Ann were interested in serial imagery, not as in the stuff you eat, but seriality, sort of series. Certainly Jo Ann was working in that respect when illustrating books. Elsa did the same thing in her book illustrations, greeting cards, and also advertising. You'll see the sequence, the process of Jo Ann's work as she was moving from storyboarding to actual television advertising and print advertising. So there is an interesting link between them, not only in their early advertising work, but also in their interest in serial imagery. And as you can see in some of the examples of Elsa's work, she was looking at subject matter, sometimes the same image repeated in a different medium with a different point of view. In this case, reversing the image, creating a whole different environment for it, so they are completely different in tone when you look at them. Some of these works on the other wall, you'll notice that William O'Neill, who was a preferred subject for a period in the 1960s, is shown, in this case, next to each other, two different views of him seated, one in an interior with an abstract background, another seated with a basically empty background, both of them the same model, represented in different ways. He also appears in the painting called Man in the Mill, which is a few paintings down. The idea of seated adolescence interested her, so the two young men are shown there in similar poses, but again from different perspectives, rendered in different media. So one is an oil painting, the other is made with pastel and Conte crayon on a raw piece of linen. So really exploring processes of making art in terms of series. So she was looking at the same basic subject from a variety of different perspectives. Sometimes she was creating an etching, sometimes she was making a drawing, sometimes it was a painting, sometimes it was a mixed media work, which very much interested her. Next to the Man in the Mill is another etching of a mill. It's the same basic interior, but again from a different point of view with a different medium. And it looks almost completely different. But when you look a little closer, you realize these are actually very similar ideas that are manifested visually in remarkably different ways. On the end is an image that represents very well another aspect of Elsa's work, and that is the contemplative figure. The young men who I was talking about earlier are also contemplating, people lost in thought, usually isolated, in a kind of pensive state. That is the sort of thing that interested Elsa. Single figures in these kind of pensive moments really appear a great deal in her work. And that was one of the things that really, one of the threads that runs through her work through most of her career. In the display cases, as I've already mentioned, one of Jo Ann's book illustrations, and the other has an early illustration by Elsa in a publication that was produced in the 1940s. So you can also see how that relates visually. Interestingly, there's a very simple kind of abstract wallpaper background in the illustration that's shown there, and it corresponds nicely to her interest in abstract backgrounds in other works, like this yellow painting of O'Neill, number 4, which you see on the back wall. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of what this exhibition is about, or maybe a lot of an idea, I don't know. But I found it particularly fascinating to find the overlap in their careers, and also to see the relationship, as two generations of women from a creative family. That to me is very interesting. And this has been a kind of interesting outcome of a thought I had a number of years ago, not specifically about the Goldsmiths, but a colleague and I had this idea of having a conference panel about relationships between two different artists. And it actually ended up being canceled because we didn't have enough people submitting papers. So I just put this idea about these kinds of connections in the back of my head and forgot about it. So really when Laurie said, oh, what about a mother-daughter show? I think that whole thing just sort of sprung back into my head. And then I got really interested in finding out if there was really a connection between these two, or if they were really just very different people. And as it turns out, they are both. They're both really different people, and they are deeply connected. So I hope you enjoy the show. I think it's a really interesting group of works. They were both excellent artists in very different ways.